Perfect. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. My name is Jeremiah Periag, and I'm the Consultation and Engagement Lead for WSP's Environment Team, and I'll be facilitating today's meeting. Today, as all of you know, we're going to be discussing the Mississauga Parking Regulation Study. Just as a reminder, the study only deals with off-street parking, which refers to the number of parking spaces required as part of a new development and/or land use change. These rates are set out in the city's zoning bylaw. We go ahead to the next slide. Perfect. And before we continue, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that today we gather virtually on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wyandot, and the Huron people. We also acknowledge the many First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and other global Indigenous peoples who call Mississauga home. We welcome everyone. We can go to the next slide. Perfect. Got a fair bit of time for this meeting, but we're going to get right into it so that we can have plenty of time for discussion and questions at the end. As you can see, the first item that we have here is welcome and introductions. So I'll start by introducing myself, then having the rest of the project team introduce themselves. So as I mentioned, my name is Jeremiah Periag, and I'm the Consultation and Engagement Lead for WSP's Environment Team. Annabelle, would you like to go ahead?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming today. My name is Eniver Cabrera, and I'm the project lead from the City of Mississauga City Planning Strategies.
Perfect, thank you. We can go to Catherine as well.
My name is Catherine Morton. I'm the Manager of Planning Strategies and Data at the City and also working on this project.
Perfect, thank you. Jasmine, you can go ahead as well.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Jasmine. I'm the Community Engagement Assistant, and thank you all for being here tonight.
Perfect, and Jessica from the city as well. No worries. Is there anyone else from the city on the call right now that I should be introducing? Okay, perfect. Next, we'll go to Sharon.
You're muted, Sharon, sorry.
No worries. I don't think I can hear.
Yeah, sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. It's Sharon Sterling from WSP, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Josie, you can go ahead as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Josie Lee, also on the WSP team.
Perfect. And Josie, just let you know, you are a little quiet there, but I think we could hear you. And last, we have Suzette from HDR.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Perfect. And we'd also like to thank Councillor Dasko for his attendance, as well as Councillor Dask and Councillor Kovac. So here you'll see the agenda for today's meeting. We just covered the welcome and introductions. We're going to be moving straight into the presentation where we're going to be discussing the study process and key findings. We'll also be discussing the precinct criteria and boundaries. Following that, we're going to be presenting the draft parking regulation changes. And finally, you'll learn more about the draft bicycle parking regulation changes as well. Following that, we'll have time for a pretty lengthy discussion period that will include a significant amount of time for questions. And finally, we're going to be discussing next steps. Go to the next slide. Perfect. So we're going to be using WebEx for the duration of the meeting, including the Q&A session. On the bottom left of the screen, you'll see a button that looks like a little chat box with the letter CC written on it. Please click on that button if you would like to use closed captioning that'll be auto-generated during the presentation. We also ask that everyone other than the presenter to please mute themselves for the duration of the presentation by clicking the mute button in the bottom left bar. Directly to the right of the mute button, you'll see the start and stop video button, which you can use to turn your cameras on and off. On the bottom right, there's also a chat icon button that will open the chat box, and you'll be able to ask questions here during the presentation. Another way to ask questions during the presentation is to raise your hand. You can do that by clicking on the hand button to the right of your name when hovering over it in the participants menu. You can do that during the Q&A period, and I'll be able to call on you, and I'll ask you to unmute yourself to ask the question in the order that it was received. For those who are calling in and who are not using the computer, please press *3 to raise your hand, and I'll be able to call on you to ask your question, and you'll be able to use *6 to unmute yourself. Go to the next slide. Perfect. And this slide sort of just rehashes what we were speaking about on the previous slide. Can you press the forward button once again, Catherine? Perfect. So there are a couple options that can be used to chat with us while the meeting is ongoing. You can use your computer or mobile phone by typing in the chat box. You can use your computer or mobile phone by using the raise hand function, like I mentioned. If you're on your phone, feel free to press *3. And after you're called on, if you are on your phone, you can use *6 to unmute yourself. And for the best viewing experience today, we do recommend using the stack view. You can find this on the top right of the page. If you have the chat bar or the participant list open, it might just be slightly to the left of that as well. Next slide. Perfect. And we just want to request as well that everyone in the meeting, when asking a question, providing input, or addressing others, please participate in a manner that is active, respectable, and equitable to others in attendance. And perfect. And we're going to be moving on to a poll to see who is in attendance in the room. So you should see a poll pop up on your screen shortly. I know Jasmine is going to be sharing her screen in a second to get the poll going. Please read the poll and respond with which group that you belong to. And we're just trying to get a better understanding of who's in the room today. So we've got a fair mix of quite a spread of people at the poll today. So we have, looks like 13 residents, a number of developers, folks representing business associations as well, and some developers. So we should have a pretty wide range of discussion during the last part of our presentation today. So we're very much looking forward to it. And Catherine, you can go ahead and share your screen again. And we should be good to get the presentation started.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Jeremiah. So I'll just be running you through a short presentation, and a lot of the information in this presentation we'll be showing you again in the discussion section. So if there's something that you want to look at, you'll have the opportunity to look at the slide again. So just before I start, as Jeremiah mentioned, this study's been scoped to look at off-street parking within Mississauga. So we're from the city's planning and building division, and we're responsible for setting parking rates and requirements for new developments or changes in land use or expansions to existing developments, and those rates sit within our zoning bylaw. We work closely with our transportation and works colleagues who are responsible for on-street parking and responsible for everyone's favorite parking enforcement. So while this study is looking at off-street parking, we also wanted to let you know that the city's about to launch a similarly scoped on-street parking study that's going to be addressing things related to parking on boulevards, on-street parking permissions, pricing parking, parking technology, and so on. So we understand that there's a connection between the two, but the focus of tonight's discussion is off-street parking. So this study has really been developed in response to the parking master plan and implementation strategy that council adopted for the city in 2019. This looked at all aspects of parking. And in terms of off-street parking, it set out a range of recommendations that we're really looking to implement through this study in our zoning bylaw. So within that parking master plan, there was directions for planning and building to establish 4 parking precincts to really tailor parking rates within the city, to undertake a comprehensive review of all of our off-street parking rates, and to implement bicycle parking requirements, along with a few other things. So the way we've designed this study is really to respond directly to that report and to really be implementing some of those key directions. So in terms of where we're at, we've kicked off the study and we undertook a range of background research. We've done a lot of best practice research, municipal benchmarking. We looked at parking utilization rates right across the city. We've looked at parking variances that have been approved across the city. We've interviewed and surveyed stakeholders, spoken with the public, with council, and so on. We collected all of that information, and WSP compiled it and put it into a draft recommendations and rate report, which we took to the council or the Planning and Development Committee in May. I've spent this summer really digging into those draft recommendations and trying to strengthen and improve them. We've done additional consultation, and what we're presenting to you tonight is a refined version of those recommendations that's tried to bring in the feedback we've been hearing over the last few months. We're then planning to work on continuing to refine those recommendations in the months to come. And we'll bring that back to Planning and Development Committee in the fall and bring back the final zoning bylaw for consideration in the winter. So as we were doing this work, we learned quickly that Mississaug has never comprehensively updated its parking rates. So as a result, the city has higher parking rates often than many of its peers. As I think I mentioned, we did a lot of municipal benchmarking. So I included a sample of some of this benchmarking in the graph on the side. You can see Mississauga's down the bottom. This is just the restaurant rates within the city. But in comparison to Oakville or Ottawa or Edmonton, Kitchener, you can see the city has much higher rates. So we're really looking, a couple of things I guess happen when, sorry, it sounds like there's an emergency outside. A couple of things that happen when, we have these higher rates in places, I guess either more parking gets built, and this is very land intensive, or alternatively, we start receiving variances. So people looking to vary the rates set out in our zoning bylaw. And one thing we've really tried to carefully consider through this study is the different rates that the city is routinely approving going forward. So, we will get applications and we are sort of consistently approving rates that are below the rates set out in our bylaw today. And we've really tried to pay careful attention to what's consistently getting approved in developing these draft rates that we'll share with you tonight. So the other challenge that comes with parking variances is it can create a real barrier for growing or evolving a business. So we've heard that a lot from the business community, and we've spent sort of a lot of time trying to understand some of the challenges they've had and been trying to formulate rates that really address some of those issues. We've also been thinking a lot about changes to car usage within the city and looking at travel data and transportation data, noticing things like over the last, 2 census periods, we've seen a 7% shift towards people using transit, or 50,000 more people catching transit. And these trends will likely increase, as the Mississauga's LRT comes online and other transit projects get established. We've been hearing from people we've been consulting with about, desire to be able to walk and have transportation choices in how they carry out their day-to-day errands. The other thing we've been hearing a lot through the process is just the impact that parking can have on housing affordability. Within Mississauga, 80–85% of the units that have been built in the city are in condominiums or in apartments. So a lot of that parking is provided in the form of underground parking, which can cost $50,000 to $80,000 per space, adding years to a mortgage. So we're really trying to figure out, how we can use parking and support some of our housing affordability goals. The other feedback that we've got from many developers is just a lot of people are increasingly wanting to purchase a unit without parking, and that's kind of held up when we've looked at census data too. We are seeing the number of households within Mississauga that don't have a car increase, while the number of households with 2 cars is decreasing, and so on. So we're really trying to figure out how to balance and plan for some of these changes that are happening. So, this is a big part of what we're really trying to get your feedback from tonight. How are we going with balancing some of these different things? Have we put priority in the right place? We'd really like your feedback on that to make sure that we can put all these ideas together and really work to be right-sizing parking within the city, and also figuring out how we can use parking as a strategic tool to really achieve some of those development outcomes and city building outcomes we're looking to see. Using parking to support affordable housing, to support local businesses, to help support a shift towards more sustainable modes of transportation and climate change. So, we're really, there's a lot of gray area here. So we're really trying to understand some of the best approaches, and we really would welcome your feedback on all these points. So in terms of the parking precincts, as I mentioned, the parking master plan directed that we establish 4 parking precincts. So through this project, we've really worked to refine those precincts. The way we've kind of set up the precinct structure or proposed the precinct structure is that the lowest parking rates would be in downtown and Port Credit, We'd have middling rates along existing and planned rapid transit lines, so that's precinct 2 and 3. And then the remainder of the city would have the higher rates, so that's precinct 4. We've created 11 different criteria to try and identify which parts of the city would go into which precinct. So I'll just share this map with you now. And again, we'll show you this map in the discussion period so you can have a look at it in more detail. But you can see precinct 1 focused on the core. The vast majority of the city is in precinct 4. And we haven't really made too many changes between May and now. The one refinement we have made to this map is that the Brightwater development and surrounding lands be elevated from precinct 3 to precinct 2. This lines up with a recent approval within the Brightwater development. And as I mentioned, we are approving rates below the zoning bylaw, and we're really hoping that through these proposed rate changes, we really can be aligning with what's getting approved on the ground. So in terms of the residential rates, I just want to start by saying we are not changing any residential rates for low density housing within the city. So all of precinct 4 singles and towns, we are not making any changes to those rates. What we are looking to do is kind of update, consolidate, and streamline the medium and high density residential rates. So you'll see we've combined a lot of different rates per bedroom into one unit, which again is intended to kind of streamline the process, to incent a mix of housing, and also to kind of avoid some of these, when a developer is selling units, they don't necessarily know the unit composition from the outset. So they're having to come back to do another round of approvals, before they've sold and then after. One thing we have in our existing bylaw at the moment is a rental specific rate. So we're looking to maintain that now through this process, and again, provide lower rates for these rental units to kind of encourage reinvestment in this stock. One thing is that a lot of our rental units, our purpose-built rental units, are in precinct 4, where the rates are much higher and often haven't been subject to many changes. So we're hoping that by having a lower rental rate, we're really going to be encouraging some investment in this really important housing mix. Another proposal is to reduce parking requirements for affordable housing from 30 to 50%. And those are affordable units that would be provided through an inclusion rezoning framework, which is a new provincial tool that will be implemented next year. And also provide greater flexibility for second units to align with rates that are routinely approved. So that is for a second unit and a single, that you would require 2 spaces for those uses. In terms of the refinements that we're proposing, some of the things we've heard through the summer, and we've looked further and talked to our enforcement team and so on, and some of the challenges around stacked back-to-back townhomes, and particularly visitor parking there, and the impact that some visitor parking can have on street parking within the neighborhoods. So we're looking to hold now the existing rates within precinct 2, precinct 3, and precinct 4 for that use. We also heard some concern that the unit rate might be too low in those areas, particularly because there's often a transit. This sort of housing form will often be a transition between the higher density intensification area and the neighborhoods. So we're looking to, again, increase the unit rate from what we initially proposed in precinct 3 and 4 to 1.3 and 1.5. We're also looking to address, and increase or at least hold what is in our existing bylaw right now for condominium apartments for precinct 3 and 4. Because again, we heard a lot of concern and challenges and identified a lot of enforcement issues relating to visitor parking in those development formats. So I will go through all of these rates. We can go through and have any questions, but you can see here just how we're trying to streamline the different rates for different types of housing into like one rate for each precinct. You can see we're trying to hold visitor parking in precinct 2, 3, and 4. Likewise for condominiums in 2 and 3, and have our separate rental parking rate to incent rental reinvestment. And so for non-residential, we've also proposed some changes. So I think I showed you in that earlier slide the restaurant rates and how they compare to some of our peer municipalities. So this is quite similar across a lot of our commercial uses. So we have proposed to reduce parking requirements pretty much across the board for most commercial uses. We haven't proposed any changes to industrial uses. We're also proposing to apply the lowest rate for those sort of main street C4 zones. And a lot of these areas have kind of been built, before modern parking requirements were created, and it's incredibly difficult for them to meet the parking requirements because of those, just constraints in the way at the time the urban environment was built. So we're looking to apply precinct 1 rates in those cases. And also group and consolidate parking requirements for appropriate uses. So right now we have lots of different rates for commercial uses, and if a business wants to change its use, it often has to undergo a variance. So for those key uses, for our top 6 uses, we're looking to create 1 rate to really streamline and give flexibility to businesses that are looking to grow and evolve. This obviously wouldn't apply if a business wants to expand their footprint. They would still need to undergo a variance, but it at least allows for that flexibility within the existing footprint. Another thing we're looking to propose is to expand shared parking for residential mixed-use sites. We've been doing that in the downtown, and it works quite well because the peak for commercial parking and the peak for residential parking vary, so we get sort of a good utilization of those parking spaces across the city. So we're looking to roll that out citywide. The one proposal that we've refined or changed since our draft recommendations in May is to just defer the parking exemption to small businesses. We did initially propose for small businesses under 220 meters squared to be exempt from parking requirements. But as I mentioned at the beginning, there's this strong connection between on-street and off-street parking. And given this on-street parking study is just about to start, we felt that might be better dealt with through that study, just to ensure we're not inadvertently putting too much pressure on our main streets and our businesses there in terms of reducing parking. So you can see here, again, we'll be able to show you these slides again, but you can see how we're looking to consolidate all of these different commercial uses into 1 rate to just simplify and allow for businesses to change tenants and evolve over time. So we also have HDR working on the bicycle parking requirements. They're also taking a precinct approach to try and tailor bicycle parking rates across the city. And what's being proposed is that city centre would have the highest bicycle parking rates, and then the rest of the city would be subject to a more standard set of rates. These bicycle parking rates would also be implemented through our zoning bylaw, and they would be accompanied by some supporting regulations that would look at the minimum dimensions of these bicycle parking spaces, and also access, location, and proximity to building entrances, just so when you're coming into a building, you're able to conveniently find the bicycle parking space. So again, a lot of information here. We will be bringing all this back up, and we can get into it in detail. So the last thing that we're looking at through this study is figuring out, how we can move towards a city to be planning for being EV ready. And that's a question that, we've been working with and asking different stakeholders and people about over the summer. And we've reached a proposed recommendation that the zoning bylaw could require that 20% of parking spaces be EV ready for residential and non-residential buildings. And the idea would be that we would review that rate over time as EV adoption increases. I mean, we know that the federal government is now trying to require 100% of vehicles be EV by 2035. And in the life of a condominium building, that is not very far away. So we're really trying to figure out how we can be working towards those goals through this study as well. And we're also proposing to update the green development standards to encourage 100% of parking be EV. Other things we're looking at is, to update guidelines that would establish share mobility and formalize the process to permit shared offsite parking. So I'll hand it over now to Jeremiah, who will be hosting the Q&A session. As I said, I know I presented a lot of information, so I'll be here to answer questions as we move through the agenda, and you'll get a chance to see some of those charts and rates again. And I'm happy to answer any questions on the information I shared. But Jeremiah, I'll hand it over to you.